Good afternoon. You all can do better than that. Good afternoon. All right. My name is Jamal Watson. I'm the executive editor of Diverse Issues in Higher Education magazine. We write about issues of access and diversity in the academy, and of course, law schools is one of the things that we focus quite a bit on. In fact, in the front, we have one of the latest issues of our magazine that focuses on law schools. So on your way out, I would recommend that you take a copy. It features a number of law school deans from across the country. This panel, or discussion rather, is going to really take a look at HBCUs and the experience and how the experience of attending HBCU law school can be different from others. And so I'm going to allow our two panelists to introduce themselves. You've heard from one already, but briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll have a facilitated conversation.
Well, hello again. As mentioned before, my name is Reggie McGahee. I am fortunate to have attended two HBCUs, one South Carolina State University in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and then Howard University School of Law in Washington, D.C.
And my name is Roderick White. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs at Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge. I attended Southern University undergraduate as an undergrad student, but I went to Wayne State for law school.
So, Vice Chancellor, let's start with you. Can you talk a little bit about the mission of your institution, particularly?
Yeah, many times Chancellor Pierre, when he's talking about it, we kind of boil it down to a couple words, just access and opportunity. You've heard consistently throughout the morning discussions about access to legal education for blacks, in particular, minorities in general. And as was mentioned earlier, when you look at all of the cases that dealt with separate but equal, that's basically kind of how Southern came about, which a lot of the other HBCUs, which was that you could not go to law school at a white law school, basically. So these law schools were open with the specific intent to educate black lawyers. As time progressed, and there's a little bit more access, if you will, there's still a wide gap in terms of access for students. So we are basically in a mission of not only educating lawyers, as Chancellor says, lawyer leaders, but also providing that kind of access and opportunity to people who otherwise wouldn't get it.
And that access and opportunity piece is really important, right? Because it provides a whole generation of individuals who otherwise might not have thought about matriculating the opportunity, right?
Absolutely. I think what's important, if you think about everything we heard this morning, as I was sitting back thinking about it, how it basically makes the case for the HBCU. I mean, we're the tip of the spear on this whole access thing. I mean, you keep hearing people saying you want to enter into a profession where only 5% of the people look like us, but let me give you some other news. There's only 3% HBCU law schools in the country, and we educate 25% of the African-American lawyers in this country. We do the heavy lifting. We know how to do this. That's what we do.
Dean, you think about Howard's history, storied history, and all the individuals who went through that institution. Can you talk a little bit about that mission?
Yes. Fortunately, Howard will be celebrating 150 years of existence next year, so thank you. And I'm proud to say that we've been consistently dedicated to also access, but making sure that we don't just provide access to the profession, but through the ripples of creating new lawyers, that we provide access to legal access across our society. And that for every one lawyer that we graduate, then we assume that you will touch 100 other people. Now, there are so many communities where there's a gap to legal access and quality legal representation. And if you think about how few lawyers you knew before you even started the journey to law school, then it starts to make sense why there's still a need. I think a lot of times we hear that there's 1 million lawyers in the country, but there are so few that look like us that there is always a need for more attorneys of color. And the HBCUs are primarily responsible for diversifying the profession, not just the communities that you may be a part of. Howard has been committed to it, just like North Carolina Central, Texas Southern. Who else do we have? FAMU. Without these institutions, then there would be a much more sizable gap than the one that we started to chip away. But we don't just chip away for our institutions. We are constantly fighting for diversity so that you can go to a Georgetown or a Harvard or a Yale, because ultimately we want you to have a true choice, so that it's not a question of an HBCU versus a PWI, but is this a good institution for me? And will I get the skills, the training, and the environment so that I can be successful? Because ultimately that's what we need universally across our society.
That fit is really important. But also, I wonder that oftentimes when we talk about the HBCU experience, we make it seem as if it's a monolithic, right, experience, that all the HBCUs are the same. And they're not, they're different. And so it's really important that institutions speak to the ways in which they are different. And I'm just curious to know, are your institutions kind of different from each other?
I think it's important to keep in mind that even an institution in itself still exists in an environment. Howard is very fortunate to be in Washington, D.C. It's one of the most vibrant international cities in the country. So therefore, there's going to be access and opportunities in Washington, D.C. that may be different in other places in the country. But it doesn't mean that because there's access and opportunity in D.C. that Howard is the best institution for a student. It just means that that student can add that to the recipe, into the evaluation, into the critique of the institution, to determine whether that's a good fit for them. And then if they feel that it's a good fit, that's part of the evaluation. The second fit is, well, who am I? Why do I think that this environment will be conducive to my needs, my goals, the things that I want to accomplish? And then somewhere in that mix should be the school of the pool of schools that you want to apply to. There are some HBCUs that are in smaller towns, and I think that could be a wonderful thing, because DC can be a distraction. Right now there's CBC going on, the annual legislative conference, where there's a major event going on in the middle of classes. So if you were distracted and you think that you have to go and participate in the conference, then you could also miss out on some very important working development and building blocks that you need to be a good attorney. So if you aren't the type of person that can be focused and need to eliminate the distractions, then going to North Carolina Central or going to Texas Southern, where those things aren't going on in the immediacy, could help you meet the goal that you've set for yourself, so that you can be that phenomenal lawyer that we need you to be. So I think in the recipe of determining success, it's not just saying, okay, well, I've heard that Howard's a national law school, so it's the only law school that I should go to. No, just because that's one of the things that we are proud of and that is a marker of ours, doesn't mean that that's the best solution or the best recipe of determining what is the best school for you.
Well, I will say this as it relates to Southern and our uniqueness in terms of that. And I agree with all of those things as it relates to the different schools and all. I think that each does carry some level of distinctiveness. People talk about Jim Crow, and we try to tell people, look, we live with Jim Crow. We're in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Everybody's heard probably about the Elvin Sterling shooting, all of those different things that relate directly to race, police, and you're like on the ground right there with it. We've got law students that were involved with the DA's office. The DA of East Baton Rouge Parish, who's white, is a Southern graduate, though. The several judges that sit in that judicial district, as a matter of fact, many years ago, it was one of our graduates that filed a lawsuit, which basically opened up some redistricting so that black judges we would have more black judges, because basically the way the districts were set, we didn't have that. Legislators, we're like 5 minutes from the Capitol. We have at least 15, probably 20 of the 120 or so legislators in Louisiana, Senate and House, are Southern graduates. So everywhere from the judiciary, the DA's office, the first black female African-American DA is from Southern. So we are constantly making our own mark in that sense, on top of the fact that 35 to 38% of our student body is white. So it gives a unique perspective to not only our students, but to black students, but also to white students. You know, you come in because the distinction when you're trying to practice law and learn it, I think at least as a black person is, you know, many times if I'm starting to talk to you about constitutional law and what police can or cannot do, criminal procedure, and that's just not my experience. I mean, what do you mean they can't stop me and frisk me without probable cause, you know? They do it all the time, you know, and then the white students look at you and go, oh, they don't do that. So there's a diversity even within the student body that allows, because some of the access and opportunity is coming to them too. You see, there's some of them who maybe their LSAT scores weren't what they wanted to be, but guess what? Now I've got to come and I'm sitting in the classroom with folks that don't look like me, which forces a bigger conversation, I think, and a uniqueness amongst that student body.
Absolutely. Howard doesn't have a part-time program, right? Do you all have?
We do. Southern does have a part-time evening and day program, as a matter of
Talk
fact.
a little bit about that.
Yeah, the evening program basically is a 4-year program. We allow students basically to come in. They get basically the same slate of professors, even though there may be more adjunct professors who tend to come from whether it's downtown, the DA's office, or some other practicing firms that basically teach the students in the night program. Some of our out-of-state students prefer that. You know, they come in, they kind of can settle down, get started in law school, maybe get a job to start, and then kind of get going. The day program, pretty much the same thing. It's 10 hours that you get to take in a semester. Many times we can kind of curtail the program, if you will, for students where they can be there maybe 3 days a week or, you know, something like that in their first year. Of course, the ABA is even now talking about allowing some online stuff for first-year students. So combining that with the part-time program makes it a lot more flexible and opens the door for a lot more people to go.
Can you, recruitment is a big thing, and you're in admissions, so you're focused on that. But retention, how do we retain the students once they actually get there? So can you speak to some of the initiatives and efforts that both of your institutions have implemented to keep students and get them to graduation and beyond?
Retention is very important, and we don't want to invest the time, effort, and energy and resources to get you into law school to leave you or to have you leave us because there's not a good fit. And invariably, that will happen every year, but we try to reduce the amount of times that happens. And one of the most significant ways that we choose to do that at Howard is through our academic support and bar prep program. As soon as you enter our law school, you are first given a student mentor, usually a 2 or 3L, who's either had a similar profile based upon their professors as you have, and they definitely have gone through the first year, so they understand what you're going to go through, and then they just are there to be a sounding board, a person that gives you advice. You're also given a faculty mentor who is specifically there to guide your academic coursework and your course of study for the 3 years that you're in the law school. But more importantly, we start preparing you for the bar exam on day one, because there's no point in you investing close to $150,000 in your law degree if you don't pass the bar. Here's something important, you know, and I've always found this very interesting. Routinely, students will say to me on the admissions end, and I mentioned this briefly in my comments before, that I'm more than my numbers. But then they want to look at the numbers of our graduates and our bar passes rates of HBCUs and then say that somehow there's something wrong with our program because it's not near 80, 90, 100%. Now, what we've done is that we've put a significant amount of time, effort, and research into trying to figure out why. And what we've identified is that the reason why more students of color are not passing the bar isn't because they aren't smart enough, but it's resources. The average student that will sit for a bar will need to spend about $10,000 over the summer that they're studying and about another $5,000 in a bar prep course after you graduate in order to be properly prepared for the bar. And where do you think that money comes from? From your pocket or your savings, or you'll borrow money to do it. And for many students of color, if you don't have a rich uncle or auntie, or if you don't have a savings account, or if you don't have resources, then many students will invariably try to work to offset that debt while they're studying. And anything that prevents you from focusing exclusively on studying for the bar exam while you're preparing for it is a distraction. And what we find is that when you remove those distractions, students tend to do better. So I'll give you this example. We put a bar prep program in place at the law school approximately 3 years ago. And since then, we've always had 2 jurisdictions where our students take the bar the most. That is New York first, then usually DC. It's starting to flip now because DC has joined the universal bar exam, where you pass in one jurisdiction, you can practice in multiple jurisdictions. But in New York alone last year, our bar passes rate went up from around 68 to 70% to 92%. And it shows that it's never been how smart you are. We know you're smart. But if you can't afford to focus on being smart, then it doesn't do you any good. And then you ask yourself, well, why isn't this the same in other law schools? Well, because you're only 3 or 4 or 5% of the population. Even if all of you fail at a majority white institution, then they can still have a 90% bar passes rate, and all of you can still fail. So because you see a global bar passes rate, it doesn't mean that students of color that are usually dealing with different issues and different factors and different scenarios are passing at those same rates. So it's important that if you're going to make the assumption, that you ask deeper questions to make sure that you're truly getting the proper perspective, because I think if that happened, then you would see that more students would realize that the best investment for them is to go to an HBCU.
Absolutely. I love this man. Now, so now all you got to do is compare our cost to his, and you'll
We're
know.
gonna get the cost in a minute.
That's
yeah.
right. You know that Southern is the place you want to be. As far as because I mean he's absolutely right. One of the things that we have too though is we have a summer pre-law program where we actually allow students that once you're admitted in the law school, we'll send you a letter and say, look, we've got a program that's 2-3 weeks. If you can invest the time, you come. We'll pay for you we have our dorms on the campus. You stay for free, your meals are for free, and we spend a week, 2-3 weeks delving into a law school class environment, teaching you some of the basics, et cetera. If a person can't get through that, what we now have is the first week of law school, something we call lowering fundamentals. We basically went into a partnership with Barbary. I mean, we have to pay them for it. But basically, that first week of law school is dedicated strictly to spending time helping people to understand not what a law school classroom is like, but why law school works like it does. What we found is the hindrance to most people in that first week of class is in the first semester even, and you've already heard that you're going to get one test, and by the time you figure out that one test, it's too late. So we try to spend that week so we understand why what's happening in the classroom. Why did I just leave this classroom not feeling like I learned anything? Why did the professor spend all this time asking all these questions? And when you leave out of that, we're hoping then that you'll be able to walk into the classroom with a little bit more preparation. On top of that, this year we shifted and created another, last year we created it, this year we took it a little further, another first semester course. It's called Lowering Process 1. And then what happens there is we have our academic counselors. We have academic counselors that are assigned to groups of students, and each of the academic counselors are now teaching a course so that every student basically has been assigned to a counselor through that course. So that if you're having trouble or difficulty understanding some material, and what goes on in those courses are pretty much skill. Writing, how to manage that, the reading, case briefing, so that when you leave there and you go to your law school class, you're able to take care of what you need to. And in tying into what you said, which is really significant, is this understanding where people consistently keep thinking that when you look at bar passage rate, that number is what ought to drive your thought process, because that number is not indicative of the program itself. Because I tell people if that's the case, then that means that if you look at on average, the median score for African Americans on the LSAT is 142. You know, I mean, I'm just sorry, but that's just what it is. That means that 50% of you guys score 142 or less. So, you know, if we're already out in society being told that 150 is at risk, then that means that 50% of us at 142 or below, and trust me, there's not many over the 150 mark. When you start getting up there, you're dropping down into 5-6% of the population. So that means then that as far as the rest of society seems to be concerned in law schools, our whole population's at risk. But what he just told you is we've got students graduating from our schools where the median LSAT may be 144, who are passing the bar in the 60-70%. Well, I mean, we got to be sprinkling some kind of dust on them or something over here if, in fact, we're getting them through the bar.
Well, and maybe I got so excited about the point I was making about the statistics that I forgot to complete our program. We also pay for half of your bar prep program for you. So every student that comes into our law school graduates with a bar prep program, and 2, we put you on a payment plan so that when you graduate, your payment is already taken care of. So it's already done. All you have to do. Now, here's the second part about it. Remember when I told you earlier that, faith without works is dead? We have analyzed all of our students for the last 3 years studying for the bar, and we've identified a sweet spot where if you do at least 80% of the bar prep assignments that are given to you, then we have 100% bar passes rate at that rate. So it's not even that we can give you the bar prep course, but if you don't do the work, it's not going to go anywhere. So we've told students, and then we actually stay on you over the course of the summer. We can log in and watch who's actually doing the assignments, and if we think that you're not, then we call you to find out why you're not doing it. And it's a shame. We shouldn't have to, but we will until it gets to 100% because that's ultimately what we want to. But you have to understand that none of this is going to happen without the type of investment of time, effort, and energy and resources on both parts, the school and the student, to get to the ultimate goal, which is to get you past the bar, no matter what jurisdiction. And then also keep in mind, not every school takes multiple jurisdictions as on average for the bar exam. Like I said, for Howard, we're in Washington, D.C., but the jurisdiction that most of our students take the bar is New York. Then it's California. Well, then it's D.C., then it's California, then it's Georgia. There are some schools where the majority of the students take the bar in the state that they're in, so that's an important distinction. Our students are also recruited all over the nation. Most of our students will go to a major metropolitan market where there's a strong business sector, a strong legal sector, so the opportunities available to the students are important as well. So when you're doing a critique, it is, once again, two-part. Who am I, what do I want, and what am I looking for? But then, can the school provide me those opportunities and the access for the things that I'm looking for? And if you identify those things, you make a better decision in the school, and that's important as a part of retention as well. Don't tell us what we want to hear about why you want to go to school because you think that that's what will get you in. Tell us honestly who you are, because in that critique, we can say, you know what, this is a great student, but I don't have the program that she wants. It's better for me to deny her and let her go somewhere that does, so she'll be happy so that she can be the attorney that she wants to be, versus you telling me what you think I want to hear, and then I believe you, then give you the very thing you're looking for. It doesn't make you happy. You become disenchanted with the whole entire program, and then you withdraw because it doesn't give you what you need. So you have to be authentic in this process, because we're going to assume you're telling us the truth and then give you the very thing that you're looking for if we can help you.
That's really important. Let's talk finances in terms of what does it cost to go to your institution, and what support do you offer individuals as well?
Well, I did want to, and I'll tie that to what you were saying a minute ago. Just I forgot to throw that in there. Man, we'll do you if you like $1,000 or something like that toward the Barbary program too. We do that. So once you figure out what that difference is, you'll see why. I mean, you'll be like, man, you should give us a rebate on too. But it'll cost you about $14,000 a year to go to Southern as an in-state student. As a matter of fact, if you add out-of-state tuition on top of that, probably $26,000 for a year at our school. We basically, when people ask us what is the best thing that we have to offer, is quality education at a price you can't even think to beat. And people will say, well, how can you do it so low? Well, basically what's happened over the years, we've had to continue to increase it because, of course, Southern is a state institution. And as such, what happened was we were able at many times to have that, it's basically tuition that is paid through taxpayer dollars. Now, because we were a state school, what ended up happening through this whole Jim Crow thing was, that you've got this school set up, the state supporting you. But over time, what's began to happen is the state kept cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting to the point that tuition had to increase. But even as it increased, when we compared it to even the other HBCUs, we were still a good value for the dollar itself. Now then we have on top of that what Chancellor will do, and he always says just make sure the student is exhausted every possible opportunity before they say to us, well, look, my out-of-state, after I get through with my loans, I just have no money. Can you do something? We offer out-of-state fee waivers. It's like a scholarship, but not. Most of the time it's based on a person's need. So if you've done everything you can, you've borrowed all the money you can, and you've tried to plus loan, but they've denied you, typically Chancellor will say, okay, fine, how much do they owe? And his position is it's better to make $25,000 than to lose a whole student who we've accepted because they can't come up with $3,000. And a lot of times then, it's not even a scholarship that that person has. They may not even be eligible for one. But we also have scholarships, depending upon GPA and LSAT, a person will automatically be offered a scholarship at different levels. I think we don't have any full paid ones anymore. We're probably up to maybe 6,000, 7,000 a semester is the most. But, at 14,000 a year, then you only need $100. To wrap up tuition. So we have a lot of that available from that standpoint, but that's where we are cost-wise.
Howard is a little bit more. Our tuition per year is approximately $32,000 a year. We are a private institution, so even though we do receive a federal appropriation towards the university of approximately $250 million, the tuition is for a private school is still one of the more affordable law schools in the country, especially for the access. Howard has over 300 employers on our campus every year, ranging from the top 100 firms in the country to every government agency that you can name, from East Coast to West Coast to medium and small size firms as well. So there's always an aspect of the type of law that you can practice, and I think that in part it's expensive because DC is expensive. I'm from Georgia, and my first example that I can remember of the difference in price of Augusta, Georgia, where I'm from, to Washington, D.C. when I moved was going to Burger King. And a week before I moved to D.C., I went to Burger King and I got a Whopper combo and it was $2.99. And I moved, this was 15 years ago, so. It wasn't 15, almost 20 years ago, oh Lord. And then I went to Burger King in D.C., and the same combo was $5.89. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But the point is that DC is a much more expensive city. And we have a number of our students, about 15% of our students will be on full tuition. We also give up to 50% of the entering class some type of tuition assistance, which is as low as 25% up to 100% of tuition. But all of our students will at least have to pay their living expenses. And that's estimated at an additional $30,000 a year. So if you're looking at coming to Washington, D.C., understand that it's going to be different than Georgia. If you're from Georgia, it's going to be different than Louisiana or Texas. The only states where it may not be a shock is coming from California or New York. Because and depending on where you are in California and New York, it may not be a shock to you. But we do want to make sure that we do a certain amount of financial counseling for you, that you do see this as the investment that it is, and that you make wise decisions. I see students every year that will come into law school and feel like they have to live like they're lawyers already. They have to have cable TV. They want a one-bedroom with a den, and they're paying way more than we estimate the cost of living to be because they feel like there's a certain level of comfort they deserve. And also, we can't absorb your car payments. We can only give you money for things that are directly attached to going to and from school. So if you have an $800 car payment, we can't absorb that because we can only give you money that the average student will need to go to and from school. And I throw that as a side because people always want to increase their budget to cover their car payment. And also, it's only a 9-month budget. So that means that you have to understand that you are only going to get the money for the time that you're in school. So if you go to summer school, of course your budget can be increased, but it's a 9-month budget. So these are just things that as a student going in, you have to understand. So that's why I mentioned the question about your credit earlier. Know your credit history, know your credit score. If you don't have a good credit history, clean it up now. If you don't have a credit history at all, start building one now so that it's at least an option for you to be able to finance your education. Start looking for third-party scholarships right now. All these scholarships for these outside organizations that will give you money for graduate and professional school, usually they're the same scholarship every year, it's just the date that changes. So why wait until you need the money to start looking for it? Start researching it now. If you're 2 or 3 years out, put a list together. Go ahead and write the essays. Go ahead and fill out the application. And then the year that you need it, send it in early because every year this money goes unclaimed. I know one young lady in our class last year, she had $75,000 in aid to go to school from outside sources just because she put in the time, effort, and energy to write out an essay. So definitely, if you start earlier enough now, you can do enough things so that the cost won't be a problem.
We have about 10 minutes. I'm going to get some questions in. Are there any questions? Okay. Very loud.
Yeah, the 3+3 program just basically allows us to bring somebody into our school that has not completed their bachelor's degree. Though the programs typically, though, are connected to your undergraduate school program. So in other words, we can bring in folks from our Southern undergrad. We've got some folks in other schools throughout the Louisiana system that we can bring in because we have articulation agreements with them. Now, there's nothing wrong. The ABA has some, the rules. People, for some reason, keep thinking that you have to have graduated from from undergrad to go to law school. That's really just not true. The ABA rules are clear that, you could admit somebody based on experience. You don't normally do that, life experience. But it's possible that a person could have as much as 3/4 of an education and you decide, you know what, we're going to admit them to law school. It's a kind of case-by-case basis, but that 3+3 program is really if a person's not either at some Louisiana school or at Southern undergrad, probably not an option that they could exercise.
Yes.
I, there's nothing different for our process than theirs, in the sense that we want the best of you, and so do they. I think what you should do is, in preparation, no matter what the institution is to properly vet and research and identify what you want. And then there's going to be a pool of schools, whether they be HBCUs or PWIs that fit that, and then apply earnestly for those schools, and then research those schools and visit those schools so that you're not putting resources in a direction that ultimately you wouldn't decide to take if you were given the opportunity. And the sooner that you start that process, the more time you have to vet the schools and to think about what you want. And then therefore, ultimately in the end, follow the directions. Some schools will allow you to write a diversity statement in addition to your personal statement. Some schools don't. So you really have to make sure you just follow the instructions. But ultimately, we want the best of you, and we need you to write that as concisely and as early as possible in the process.
You all do interviews?
We don't do interviews in person, no, not at this point in time. I mean, some students have, it's interesting what people do, as you say, because I serve as a chair of the admissions committee. So what will happen is somebody may just show up at school and say, can I talk to you for a minute? I'm like, who are you? And then they'll tell you stuff. And well, then they've just got themselves an interview, even though you don't have them. And, it's amazing sometimes what impact that has when you pick up a file and you say, I remember this name, okay, well, the person came. But actual scheduled, no. No, we don't do that.
I hedge on that question only because we've gone back and forth on it. I think, in my opinion, interviews don't help students. And I say that because the desire to sell is so strong that we try to make sure it's as fair a process as possible. If someone is in school in Washington, D.C., it can get on the metro or get in an Uber and come to D.C. and sit in my office, I think that that's an unfair advantage over someone that lives in California and has to put a lot of resources to get the same opportunity. So we try to make sure that the things you're critiqued on are the things that we ask you for. And we definitely want to meet you, but we're not giving you a decision because we like you as individuals. I've admitted people I don't like because they've earned the opportunity to get an education from our law school. So if your idea is to get an interview so I can like you, then you're wasting your time there. If your idea is to give me some insight that I need to make a good decision about you, then there's a place for that in the application. But ultimately, if we're going to make this a fair process, which is what I hope that you want, then we're going to make a decision off the four corners of your application. Your job is to make sure that you give us as much insight in those four corners to inform us of that decision.
Questions? Yes.
Well, quite a few of our students, many times we've been told, will go out and quote unquote hang their own shingle, as they say. So we have several classes, one that we do call entrepreneurship in the law, where students are basically kind of given an access to that type of information. We have another class called Law Office Practice, where we specifically get in and deal with that. I teach a class on professional responsibility, and in that class, I deal with those things that each of the rules as a client walks in your office, how that works, and the business aspect of it when we start talking about client fees and where they should go, how to classify any money that comes into your hands and what it is, but also trying to make sure we make it clear to students exactly what she said. You can't just walk out. You know, there's a difference between, you know, being good at practicing law, cooking hamburgers or anything else, and running a business, you know. So sometime it may be a need to go take you a business course that we don't necessarily have. I will say this in reference to some of what I had heard earlier. I mean, we've had lawyers, I mean, from our school. I mean, Walmart's top, the treasurer of Walmart, okay, and the top tax person for Walmart was a black female that graduated from our school. We have law students at Sidley Austin in New York. We have them at Sidley Austin in Chicago. So students go to top firms and all over the country from our school. They also practice in major corporations. The distinction, I think, of what it is that we do when it comes to that is we know that a lot of our students, and it's not because they can't succeed at it, but it's because of the very thing I keep hearing all day long. And I keep hearing shoot your shot and think high of yourself and all this stuff people are saying. But some of the very things we're up against all the time is because of that very problem. So many of our students have to go out and start their own practice because nobody wants to give them a shot. But we've got one of our alumni who has the highest judgment ever in a court in Louisiana. Something like 60, 70, $80 million judgment he won. Okay, and he'll tell you he wasn't the best law student in school, but he got a chance, and he went out and he started, and now he's doing really, really well. So we do, I think, a good job of trying to prepare him that way.
I think it's important that any student that goes into law school, that they come out with an idea that you are the talented 10th. And I want to talk about that to a degree because I think you've heard that phrase before, right? All right, so I think we may all have a concept of what it means, but I think when Du Bois spoke about the talented 10th, that he was, in my opinion, he was misunderstood. And what I mean by that is that the impression that I think some people have is that only 10% of us will make it. Because there's obstacles, there's barriers, there's things that are in our way that when you funnel us down, only 10% of us will make it to the opportunities that we've identified or set for ourselves. I've always seen it from the perspective of there would be 10% of us that would make it, but then we have to create more opportunities for the rest of our community. And I think because you will enter a profession that will give you such power, access, and opportunity, that you then have to take that power, access, and opportunity and create other opportunities in the community that we serve. So part of that is starting law practices, but also starting other businesses or advising small businesses that grow to employ and empower others in our communities. So we have that run throughout our legal clinics and our coursework. Not everyone wants to start their own practice. Some will do it out of necessity. But ultimately, our job as a law school, in all of our law schools, even if it's a PWI, is to make sure that you have a certain skill set so that if someone comes to you and they need legal access, that you can give that opportunity. That's a requirement of our schools. I think the HBCUs are a little more attuned to it because they understand the reality that we are a small fractional percent of the population. They understand that a lot of the business comes from your community. And think about it, if you come from a community that's underserved, it's also likely a community that doesn't have a lot of financial resources. So you're serving people, but they're not able to pay you. So then you're going to be, no light bill gets paid off good wishes or a job well done. So we still have to think about survival as well. So that's an important aspect. And those are conversations that we have at our law schools at most HBCUs. So it's important that even as we look at entrepreneurship, that we don't take it out of the concept of the society that we live in, and we understand that we have bigger issues to still address too.
Yeah, we have dual degree programs we have a dual degree MBA with our business school. We have a dual degree master in public administration with our public administration school. and the chancellor, we've been working on a dual degree in public administration and criminal justice. And he's even talking about trying to get a dual degree in where a person can also get a PhD. Because irrespective of what you realize is that most of the time when they address us, they still fail to want to give us our credits as doctors. Even though we've spent lots of time getting a Juris Doctorate, we're still in higher education, not necessarily called doctor. You know, they still refer to us as attorney or Mr. whomever, right? So the idea is that he's thinking that's a way to get that credential. But yeah, we have those. Now, the thing is that those programs are typically more like 4-year programs at a minimum, because the ABA will only allow you to take so many credits, 20% of what's required. So that's like 90 credits for us to graduate. So no more than 18 a semester you can take. Plus, you may need anywhere between 30 to 32 for the MBA. So, you know, you got to kind of march those and marry them together. But you have to be admitted in both schools. So in other words, you don't just get admitted in ours and then you automatically into the business school. You have to apply to the business school, take the GMAT, and make sure that your score is, you know, sufficient to get in, and then you'll be admitted into those dual programs.
I feel that all education is good and all education is bad until you know how you want to use it. And I think a lot of times we look at, oh, I can just go to school and get more, but we don't know why we're doing it. Just like I think a lot of people, how many of you are in undergrad right now? All right. And I won't ask this question because I don't want to embarrass anyone or make them think that they've made a bad choice. But I'm assuming that most of you are political scientists. Right. If you don't go to law school, what are you going to do with your political science degree? Now, don't answer it because it's okay. It's okay. But I think a lot of times people think that I'm going to be a political science student so I can go to law school. You're not going to law school to be a law student. You're going to be a lawyer. But even in the law profession, you should plan backwards. What skill set do I think that I want so that I can enter the profession to do something different than another lawyer? And I think if we keep that in mind with every time that we're faced with the opportunity to go to school, then we start making decisions differently. Why am I getting this degree? What skills, what knowledge, what tools will it give me so that I can do something differently than someone else? And then you'll start to see the path that you have for yourself. Instead of hoping that I'll put enough skills together that I can plan forward, then I think you should plan backwards. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't change your mind. And if you change your mind, then you should change the course. Some people have said, you know what, I'm a semester away from graduating, so therefore I'm just going to finish. I get it, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get the skills that you need. It doesn't mean that you're going to get the training that you need to be able to do what you want in society. So many students get into law school and decide that they want to be an intellectual property attorney or they want to get into patent law. If you don't have a hard sciences background, then the ability to be a patent attorney is extremely difficult at that point. In fact, they look for some type of hard science background. So you've almost eliminated a complete practice area just because you either didn't research or you decided that you didn't want to change your major. So I say to anyone, whether it be a dual degree program or in undergrad right now, stop and pause and think and ask yourself, why am I doing this? If you're an undergrad, there is access to most colleges and universities on your campus will have a business school or a political science or school or an English department. You can get training through your elective courses that will give you access to knowledge that may not be on your degree, but you'll still have that skill set so that when you graduate, you can put all those skills together, all those tools together, and then you can enter the professional world with the ability to do something different than the person that sat right next to you in your classroom. Well, let me answer it that way. There are schools that give interviews, and I don't think that universally, or let me rephrase that, there is a benefit to interviews. But I do think that when you look at being fair, being objective, then there has to be a lot of systems that are put in place to make sure that those goals are maintained. And I think ultimately to our program, we want to make sure that it's fair and equitable. And like I said, I assume that if I get a chance to sit down with anyone in this room, that I will like you as an individual. Or that if we put a committee to sit down and talk to you, that they will like you as an individual. But there's still a lot of weight and power that we don't deserve to have in the fact that I like you or I don't like you to determine whether you should be a lawyer or not. Because whether I like you is irrelevant. because you may service a group of 100 people and they all like you and I didn't, and my position shouldn't impair you from having the opportunity to do the thing that you need. The application tells us enough different things about you that it serves as an interview. You have 2 letters of recommendations from people that have taught you, hopefully if you choose professors, and they can tell us what type of person you were in the classroom. You have the ability in your personal statement to speak to the very process that you're entering and tell us why you want to be a lawyer. You have your resume. It shows us the works and the jobs that you've had and the skills that you've developed. You have the entire scope of your application that will say, hey, this is who this person represents and who they are. And your entire application should tell us your work ethic. You know, do you apply early? Did you proofread your application? Did you pay attention to detail? We look at all those things from a very practical level too, to give us a sense of who's stronger in the process to who's not as strong, and those that are stronger get the opportunities that they're looking for.
We have time for maybe one more question. Let's go right here. That's a good question.
Well, let me, I'm going to ride on what I think that horse you were on, and that is that the concept of coming to law school and having, whether it's philosophy or something like that, we do tell students, you know, the value in philosophy, political science, those degrees, it is true that that's where it makes it a lot easier to deal with the ambiguity that's always in law, where people are thinking that somehow, you know, the professor just, it's whatever we want to make it to be. It's not. There's a process and there's an analysis we go through and we come up with an answer. And therefore, when we say it depends, you don't get frustrated as a philosophy person or a political science person because you understand the psychology of people, their mindsets, how things work. Hard science people, that's just so hard for them. You know, accountants and other people, it's like, look, just tell me the answer. 1 + 1, why you can't just tell me the answer? It doesn't depend. Tell me the answer. And if we tell them, some of my best students have ended up being accountants once they got the hang of it and understood it. And I think the point that he was making is that when you begin to graduate, like we have an intellectual property clinic, you can't even practice in the clinic with Professor Thurman if you don't have some science background. You know, you have to have something in some type of degree, math or something, can't even practice. But if with a little research, a person would know that. But, you know, who knows that they necessarily want to be a patent lawyer? I mean, typically what happens is people kind of develop patterns in their life. You know, it's like it says, you know, develop a child in the way they'll go and they won't depart from it when they're old, right? The idea is that there's something you already are about. And I suggest if you figure out what that is, you know, and you work toward that. I was always a business kind of person. My father was an accountant and all. So I have a business background. I got a business undergrad. I got an MBA. I did all that, but not because I wanted to know how to run a law practice. That just was a sidebar to that. Sometimes you might just need to hire you somebody to run your office, you know, who knows business. That's the idea. I'm just here to litigate or whatever you're doing. But I think it's about developing the skill sets that matter most to you first, that then, as he said, in the process, you can demonstrate those and then line those up with curricular that are at the school that you're interested in, you know, things. But I definitely think that if you're in any kind of hard science or anything, I would be taking, if I'm interested in law school, some classes that help me to loosen up a little bit, I call them, you know, to understand that everything isn't the speed of light and gravity and you push it and it falls. There are some things that float and we don't know why, you know, and that way you'll feel a little bit better. Because if you come as a nurse or with any other type of hard deal, when you graduate, there are lots of firms that are looking for people with those kind of skill sets. You know, and you walk in able to read doctor's notes and you're able to do stuff, you can go in and do these kind of things. It is more difficult for the people that are just, you know, philosophy or don't have those hard majors to go into some other practices. But I don't necessarily, when I'm looking at an application, I'm not looking at those kind of skill sets necessarily. I think I'm more concerned about the person's ability to navigate, if you will, and explain why they are where they are, if they're grades or whatever else the case might be. That's my thing. I will say one more thing. I don't want to go long, but in response to a question, I think it may have been yours. When you're preparing that application, your personal statement, that's a good thing. But you know, there's some stuff I just don't want to know about. You know, you need to be, whether you pray or don't pray, whatever you do, go away, contemplate, think about it. Because there's some stuff people are putting in these statements that are just so like unnecessary. I didn't need to know all that about you. It was just too much information. And then it ends up tainting the process because you're like, I don't know if I really want to know this. Now, it would be easy if I was talking to you, then I would really know. But at the same time, I'm not talking to you. So this is what you're telling me. And I'm thinking, wow, does anybody really get over that without being strange? You know? So you want to be careful what you're writing. Give it to somebody that you trust, let them read it, and say, what would you do if you read this? And then see what their response is.
I'll add that, first of all, I'm a political scientist too, so I didn't want anyone to feel bad if their major is political science. But I do think that people default to political science because they think that that's what they're supposed to do. If you choose to be a political scientist and that's what you want, then great, but make sure you're making the right decision as to why you're choosing your major. 2, your skill is important. Read and write. Those are the 2 strongest skills of a lawyer coming into law school. We will teach you some other ones like your advocacy skills, your ability to interpret and grasp information and synthesize data. But you have to be able to read and write well because we're building on top of that skill set. We don't have time to teach you that. And I'm not saying we can't, but imagine being in a room full of people that can read and write well and you're trying to get to the point where you read and write well. So practice writing every day. Read something complex on a weekly basis. The habits that you form doing that makes law school 1,000 times easier. Learn how to speed read. You will have to read hundreds of pages of legal text in a week. If you can do that faster and comprehend and process that information, then not only do you give yourself the opportunity to rest because you're not up reading, but you can go hang out with your friends, you can call your family, you can review the text again to make sure you really get it. So even learning how to speed read can be a good investment in law school. But ultimately, it is about the skill set that you come into. And I will say about the personal statement, you don't have to shock us to impress us. And I think that's what you're speaking to. I think people think, well, I have to say something different or I have to stand out in order to be able to get access to school, and it's not. Your statement can be, I want to be a lawyer and this is why, and I want to attend your law school and this is why. As long as there's authenticity and it's genuine, then that can be as impressive as saying that, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and I've backpacked across Europe for 6 months. Those are fine too, but it doesn't have to be that dramatic because I think that's what people build themselves up to. I don't have something amazing or I don't have something that's depressing that I've had to overcome, so I don't know what to write about. There's a moment in your life when you decided that you wanted to be a lawyer. I would say start there. And if that moment isn't one that you think is one that you should share, then at least you have a starting point. But there's a moment that each of you have where law became a real idea. That's a good place to start, and then relate that to why you're applying to whatever particular law school that you're applying to, and that can really help you have a strong statement.
I've learned so much over this last hour almost. Let's thank our panelists for sharing their insight with us. Thank you.